I stand tucked in a corner of the Bennett family's mansion living room in the Hamptons, Long Island, holding a glass of wine, trying to blend into the shadows of the opulent room. Crystal chandeliers overhead cast shimmering light onto the marble floor, reflecting the tailored suits and expensive watches of family members. Outside, luxury cars, from Rolls-Royce to Porsche, line up like a display of power. The air at the annual family gathering is thick with the scent of high-end perfume and the characteristic arrogance of the Bennetts. They assemble to boast about achievements, vying for attention, and I, as usual, am the target of their barbs. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. I wear a plain white shirt and jeans, deliberately understated amid the flashy suits. They compete to flaunt their successes, while I quietly smile. No one knows that Peak Pulse Consulting, the company I've secretly built over 10 years, now manages billions of dollars and quietly thwarts the very deals of the Bennett family. Aunt Margaret, in a vibrant red silk dress with a piercing gaze, spots me through the crowd. "Lucas, I almost didn't see you there," she says, her voice sweet but dripping with sarcasm. "Still working as an administrative assistant, dear." I take a sip of wine, hiding a smile behind the glass. "Administrative assistant. That's right," I reply softly, deliberately keeping my tone even. She raises an eyebrow, her meticulously groomed brows arching. "Still at that tiny consulting firm? What's it called? Peak something?" She waves her hand as if the name isn't worth remembering. My cousin Nathan, recently made partner at a prestigious Manhattan law firm, doesn't miss a beat. He strides over, his gray suit snug, Rolex glinting on his wrist. "Come on, Lucas. I could get you a real job," he says, smirking with superiority. "Something with actual potential, not just pushing papers all day." He laughs loudly, drawing chuckles from the crowd. I look at him, thinking of the stack of contracts awaiting my signature at the real office, not the decoy one I let the family see. "I'm happy where I am, Nathan," I reply, my voice calm. "Thanks." Uncle Charles, the head of the family's business empire, cuts in with a deep authoritative voice. "Lucas, you're wasting your potential," he says, his gaze sharp. "Your cousins are directors, partners, real business people, and you, still running errands for someone else." His laugh slices through the air, cold and contemptuous. Colin, in charge of finance, merely nods, his eyes icy. I feel the familiar sting of humiliation, but it's quickly replaced by a fire of determination. I suddenly recall a family gathering years ago, right after college. Back then, I stood before Uncle Charles, presenting a business restructuring idea with all the enthusiasm of youth. He only laughed coldly. "Consulting? Leave that to the big firms. You'd better start in the mailroom and learn." Nathan burst out laughing, while Aunt Margaret feigned sympathy, her eyes full of mockery. That moment, I vowed to forge my own path, an empire that would make them regret every dismissive word. Aunt Margaret's voice snaps me out of my reverie. "More wine, Lucas?" Her tone is sugary but sharp as a blade. "With an assistant's salary, you must be rationing every sip." I take a sip, smiling calmly. "No need to worry," I manage. From across the room, I catch Nathan's probing stare, Colin's indifference, and Uncle Charles's half-smirk. I stand silently, in the opulent corner of the Hamptons mansion, the wine in my hand now lukewarm. The family's belittling remarks echo like an old, worn-out tune. To them, I'm just the help, the paper pusher. But their attitude has fueled my resolve for a decade. As Aunt Margaret's icy gaze sweeps over me, I'm transported back to that fateful night 10 years ago, where it all began. Fresh off my MBA from a New York university, my mind was brimming with ideas and ambition. I'd spent months perfecting a business plan, a consulting firm dedicated to restructuring failing businesses, helping them stand strong instead of being bought out cheap. I believed the Bennett family's vast business network would embrace my idea. I prepared everything, from presentation slides to projected figures, and stood before Uncle Charles in this very living room, my heart pounding with excitement. "I want to start a consulting firm," I began, voice full of passion. "We could save companies from bankruptcy, restructure them, create sustainable profits. I've researched." But before I could finish, Uncle Charles cut me off with a scoffing laugh. "Consulting? Leave that to the big firms, Lucas. You think you're smarter than the whole family?" He looked at me, his gaze cold. "Get to the mailroom and learn real business first." Nathan, then just starting his legal career, laughed uproariously, as if my idea was a joke. "Lucas, are you serious? Save companies? You can't even save yourself." Colin, as usual, stayed silent, but his nod was enough to show he agreed with Charles. Aunt Margaret feigned comfort, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Dear, Leave business to the men in the family. Join the family company. Start small, like everyone else. But her eyes were full of disdain, as if I were a naive child. I stood there, my face burning with humiliation, clutching my crumpled plan. No one in the room saw me as someone with potential. To them, I was just Lucas, the ambitionless one, unworthy of the Bennett name. But in that moment, amid the laughter and scornful looks, a fierce determination surged within me. I wouldn't beg for their approval. I'd build my own company, in secret, and make them regret every word. That night, I left the mansion early, driving back to my small Brooklyn apartment, my mind racing. I recalled conversations with my mother, Eleanor Bennett, who'd left the Bennett family years earlier. She couldn't stand their practice of acquiring struggling companies, exploiting them for profit. "Lucas, you don't need the Bennett name to succeed," she'd said, her eyes shining as she looked at me. "You have a mind, a soul. Do what's right, and the world will see your worth." Her words were a flame, lighting the path I chose. That very night, I decided I would build Peak Pulse Consulting, a firm that not only saved businesses, but challenged the Bennett's greedy business tactics. I'd do it alone, without their money or connections. Above all, I'd keep it secret, so they couldn't interfere or sabotage. I wanted the day I revealed the truth to be the day they realized their colossal mistake. I set to work reworking my entire strategy. Alone in my cramped apartment, surrounded by books and papers, I studied why businesses failed, pinpointed their core weaknesses, and devised tailored turnaround plans. I had the knowledge, but more crucially, I had to operate in the shadows. The Bennetts were notorious for swallowing struggling companies. If they knew I was countering their deals, they wouldn't let it slide. I told myself I'd be a silent force, quietly shifting the tides, and when the time came, I'd emerge where they least expected. While sorting documents, I stumbled upon an old college notebook. The paper had yellowed, but my professor's words stood out. "Success isn't in the spotlight, but in the impact you make when no one's watching." Those words became my compass, guiding my path. I knew the road ahead would be tough, but from that small Brooklyn apartment, I began building Peak Pulse Consulting, carrying my mother's quiet encouragement and the sting of that fateful night in the Hamptons. Starting Peak Pulse was a turning point, but its beginnings were far from easy. After the night of mockery from Uncle Charles, Aunt Margaret, and Nathan, I returned with a heavy heart. I had no influence or backing like the rest of the family, only my resolve and a burning desire to prove myself. In that cramped space filled with books, I quietly laid the first foundations for the company, a step driven by an unspoken promise. I wouldn't let the past repeat itself. I found a tiny office in Brooklyn, above an old pizza joint on Flatbush Avenue. The space was barely 10 square meters, with a chipped wooden desk, a few broken chairs, and a window overlooking a noisy street filled with honking cars. The smell of flour and cheese from the shop below wafted in, mingling with the hum of a creaky fan. My savings could only cover 3 months' rent, and every night I lay awake, worrying about going broke before even starting. But I knew this was my shot. My first client came like a miracle. It was a small manufacturing company in New Jersey, Carver Industries, teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. They'd been rejected by every major New York consulting firm for being too small, not worth the investment. The owner, Mr. Henry Carver, found me through a college acquaintance. He walked into the office, his eyes skeptical as he saw me, a young guy in a rumpled shirt, sitting behind a shabby desk. "You sure you can handle this?" he asked, his voice full of doubt. I smiled, hiding my own fears. "Give me 3 months, Mr. Carver. If I fail, you lose nothing." I dove into the work like a soldier on a battlefield. By day, I analyzed Carver Industries' financials, pinpointing flaws in their production and management processes. By night, I negotiated with creditors over the phone, persuading them to extend loans. I slept no more than 4 hours a day, surviving on coffee and pizza from downstairs. At times I felt exhausted, wondering if I was chasing a pipe dream. But whenever I wanted to give up, I recalled Uncle Charles's scornful look, Nathan's laughter, and my mother's words. "You have a mind, a soul. Do what's right." After 3 months of relentless work, a miracle happened. Carver Industries slashed production costs by 30%, secured a new contract with a distributor, and paid off their biggest debt. 6 months later, they were profitable again. Mr. Carver shook my hand, tears in his eyes. "You saved my company, Lucas. I won't forget." Peak Pulse's reputation began to spread, albeit in small business circles. Struggling companies, ignored by the giants, started seeking me out, but I knew I had to be cautious. The Bennetts had eyes all over New York, And if they knew I was undermining their takeover targets, they wouldn't hold back. I needed an ally, and that's when I met Sophie Carter. She answered a job ad I placed in a local paper, walking into the office with a confident smile and an impressive resume. Sophie, fresh out of finance school, was smart, sharp, and most importantly, shared my vision, saving companies, not exploiting them. But she was blunt. "You really think an office above a pizza shop can compete with the big dogs?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. I laughed, pointing to the wooden desk. "It's not the office, Sophie. It's the idea." She nodded, and from then on she became my right hand. I set an ironclad rule. Every Peak Pulse employee had to sign a confidentiality agreement. My name couldn't appear on any public documents. I was the CEO in the shadows, running everything through Sophie and trusted associates. I knew the Bennetts would never suspect a lowly assistant like me could be behind a rising consulting firm. But the secrecy wasn't just strategy, it was fun. Every time Aunt Margaret or Nathan mocked me at family gatherings, I thought of the million-dollar contracts I'd just signed, the companies I'd saved, and my smile grew more discreet. One day, while sorting papers in the office, I knocked over an old college notebook. Inside, I reread my mother's words. "Success doesn't need others' recognition, but the value you create." Those words reminded me why I started. Peak Pulse wasn't just a company, it was a declaration of defiance against the Bennett's arrogance. From that tiny Brooklyn office, I was building an empire, and I knew, one day, they'd have to face the truth. The first success with Carver Industries opened a new door for Peak Pulse, but it was just the beginning. From that makeshift room above the Brooklyn pizza shop, I started to rise. Not through flashiness, but through subtle strategy and secrecy. 10 years after the night of mockery in the Hamptons, Peak Pulse had become one of the top consulting firms, managing billions in client assets and earning a solid reputation in New York's business world. But to Uncle Charles, Aunt Margaret, Nathan, and Colin, I was still just Lucas, the nameless administrative assistant, the paper pusher. At a company they barely cared to name, Peak Pulse grew faster than I expected. Struggling companies, overlooked by the giants, came to us like desperate souls seeking light. After Carver Industries, we saved a retail chain in Connecticut, then a tech company in Boston. Each project was a battle, analyzing financials, negotiating with creditors, restructuring teams, and sometimes late-night calls to convince clients to trust us. I worked tirelessly, but every company we saved was a victory, an invisible slap to the Bennett's arrogance. They built their empire by acquiring weak companies on the cheap. I built Peak Pulse by helping those companies stand tall, foiling their takeovers. To meet growing demand, I moved Peak Pulse's headquarters to a sleek glass building on Wall Street, Manhattan. The new office was a game changer. Polished wooden floors, glass walls overlooking the Hudson River, and a conference room with cutting-edge touch screens. But I kept the old Brooklyn office, not out of need, but for strategy. That's where I played the assistant, taking pointless calls from Aunt Margaret or Nathan, letting the Bennetts believe I was still a nobody. Every time I stepped into that Brooklyn office, smelling the familiar pizza, I smiled. This cover was my greatest weapon. Sophie Carter, now my right hand, was pivotal to Peak Pulse's growth. She didn't just manage schedules or handle paperwork. She offered sharp ideas, from streamlining processes to developing data analytics tools. I also recruited a talented team. Anna, a young analyst, who could spot financial flaws in hours, and David, a seasoned consultant, who initially doubted me but became a loyal supporter. I chose them not just for skill, but because they shared my vision, saving companies, not exploiting them. But I enforced a strict rule. Every employee signed a confidentiality agreement. My name stayed off all public records. I was the CEO in the shadows, running everything through Sophie and the team. The secrecy wasn't just to shield Peak Pulse from the Bennetts, it was part of the game. I relished Aunt Margaret's indifferent look when she asked about my little job, or Nathan's boasts about his legal deals, while I'd just signed a $1 million consulting contract. At Hampton's family gatherings, I deliberately spun dull tales of administrative work, scheduling, printing, making coffee. Their eyes glazed over with boredom, and I knew I'd succeeded in keeping them clueless. But deep down, each jab from them was a reminder I was on the right track. Peak Pulse didn't just grow in size, but in impact. We saved companies the Bennetts targeted, like HarperTech, a tech firm in Albany, or Coastal Shipping, a transport company in New Jersey. I knew every company we saved was a blow to Uncle Charles's takeover plans. HarperTech's team was restructured, boosting profits by 40% in a year. pricing their stock out of the Bennett's reach. Coastal Shipping landed a new contract after I negotiated with partners, ruining Colin's bargain buy scheme. They had no idea I was behind it, and that made the victories sweeter. But secrecy came with risks. Once at a Manhattan charity event, I ran into Nathan. He was bragging to a group of businessmen about a new legal deal when his eyes caught mine. "Lucas, what are you doing here? Lost on your way from the assistant's office." He laughed, drawing attention. My heart raced, but I stayed cool. "Just here for the company, dropping off some papers," I said, holding up a fake stack of documents. He shrugged, turned away, unsuspecting. That moment reminded me to be more careful. Every night, as I sat in the Wall Street office, watching the city lights reflect on the Hudson, I thought of my mother, Eleanor. She'd said, "Success isn't about others' recognition, but the value you create." Peak Pulse was living proof of her words. I wasn't just building a company. I was changing how business is done, one step at a time. But I knew, to stay hidden, I had to keep playing the nobody, at least until the time was right. And when that day came, the Bennetts would face the truth. The assistant they scorned held the real power. Despite the growing successes, I knew I was playing a dangerous game. Every business I saved, like Harpertech or Coastal Shipping, was a major hit to the Bennett's takeover empire. And I had to be meticulous to avoid exposing my identity. Still maintaining the administrative assistant cover, I continued mundane tasks at the Brooklyn office, while running Peak Pulse from Wall Street headquarters. But a major project loomed, bringing me closer to the Bennetts than ever. And this time, they'd need my signature, not as an assistant, but as the head of Peak Pulse. The project began when Brightcore Industries, a Pennsylvania manufacturing company, contacted Peak Pulse. They were on the brink of bankruptcy, with creditors closing in and stocks plummeting. I quickly recognized the name. Brightcore was the latest target in Uncle Charles's takeover plans. The Bennetts were notorious for buying struggling companies cheap, stripping their assets, and selling them off, and Brightcore was a perfect mark. But I had other plans. If Peak Pulse could save Brightcore, we'd not only keep it alive, but also derail the family's strategy. I met Daniel Foster, Brightcore's CEO, at the Wall Street office. He walked in, his eyes weary, but holding the grit of a seasoned leader. "I hear Peak Pulse can work miracles," he said, his voice tinged with skepticism. "But we've got 3 months before the creditors choke us." I nodded, hiding the mounting pressure. "Give me time, Mr. Foster. We'll bring Brightcore back." My Peak Pulse team dove in. Sophie analyzed financial data, spotting wasteful costs in the supply chain. Anna, the young analyst, suggested cutting an inefficient production line. I negotiated with banks, convincing them to extend loans with a detailed restructuring plan. After 3 months of non-stop work, Brightcore started recovering. Their stock price rose 25%, and they secured a major new distributor contract. Uncle Charles and the Bennetts, poised to buy Brightcore cheap, suddenly found their target slipping away. I still remember the next family gathering at the Hamptons, just weeks after Brightcore's turnaround. The atmosphere was as lavish as ever. Chandeliers gleaming, wine flowing, and boastful stories ringing out. I stood in my usual corner, plain shirt, wine glass in hand, watching Aunt Margaret command the crowd with her fake smile. She spotted me, her gaze icy. "Lucas, still doing odd jobs at that Peak something company, right?" she asked, her voice sweet but laced with mockery. I sipped my wine, hiding a smile. "Yes, Aunt Margaret, Peak Pulse Consulting. Doing fine," she smirked, waving a hand as if I were beneath notice. "Fine? Dear, an assistant's salary probably can't cover these wines." Nathan, never missing a chance, jumped in. He flaunted a new suit, his Rolex gleaming. "Lucas, I heard Brightcore hired some no-name consulting firm," he said, his tone dripping with contempt, throwing money down the drain. "Firms like that just make promises, no results." He laughed loudly, sparking chuckles from others. I looked at him, thinking of the multi-million-dollar consulting fee. Brightcore had just paid Peak Pulse more than Nathan's earnings in 3 years. "Maybe," I replied, my voice flat, masking my quiet glee. Uncle Charles, nearby, frowned at the mention of Brightcore. "That deal's hit some snags," he said, his voice low but irritated. "But nothing I can't handle." I took another sip, satisfaction spreading. They didn't know the snag was me. Peak Pulse had boosted Brightcore's stock, ruining Charles's takeover plan, and now they were scrambling to salvage it. As the party peaked, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Sophie, "Urgent meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m., Wall Street." Bennett Enterprises reps want to discuss Brightcore merger. Need response ASAP. My pulse quickened as I read it. The Bennetts, after failing to acquire Brightcore, now wanted a merger, and they needed approval from Peak Pulse Consulting, the firm they thought was insignificant. I texted back, "Prep everything. I'll be there." Looking up, I caught Aunt Margaret's scrutinizing stare. "Everything okay, Lucas?" she asked, her tone laced with suspicion. I kept calm, flashing a discreet smile. "Perfect, Aunt," I replied. "Just a meeting tomorrow. Need to take notes for someone important." In the private elevator to Peak Pulse Consulting's executive floor, I feel my heart pounding. The navy suit I'm wearing, sharp and commanding, is a far cry from the plain shirts I wore at Hampton's gatherings. 10 years of hiding, enduring the Bennett's mockery, have led to this moment. Today they'll walk into the meeting, thinking they hold the upper hand in the Brightcore merger. But the person at the head of the table is me, the assistant they never suspected. The elevator stops, and the doors slide open. Sophie Carter, my loyal assistant, is waiting outside, tablet in hand, a confident smile on her face. "The Bennett Enterprises team arrived early," she reports, walking beside me down the polished wood hallway. "Uncle Charles seems especially eager to meet Peak Pulse's CEO." I smirk, adjusting my tie. "I bet he is." I glance at my reflection in a wall of glass, checking my appearance. Hair neat, eyes sharp. Everything has to be perfect. "Main conference room ready?" I ask. Sophie nods, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "All set." Daniel Foster from Brightcore is there too. Nathan insists on handling the legal side himself. She pauses, adding with a mischievous grin, "Aunt Margaret's here for moral support, though she's not officially involved. And Colin's representing finance." I chuckle softly. Perfect audience. For 10 years, I played the nobody, serving coffee and taking notes when the family visited the Brooklyn office. They never looked twice at the quiet assistant. Today they'll have to. I stand before the heavy wooden conference room door, hearing voices inside. Charles' commanding tone, Margaret's sharp laugh, Nathan's smug remarks. I take a deep breath, push the door open, and step in. The room falls silent. Charles sits at one end of the long table, clearly claiming the power seat. Nathan and Colin flank him, their expensive suits radiating Bennett wealth. Margaret sits nearby, inspecting her nails with practiced indifference. Daniel Foster, Brightcore's CEO, sits across, looking tense. All eyes turn to me. Margaret speaks first, her voice surprised. "Lucas, what are you wearing, and where's the coffee?" She pauses, her gaze sweeping over my suit, as if she can't believe it. I walk slowly to the head of the table, opposite Charles, and sit down. "I don't bring coffee anymore, Aunt Margaret," I say, my voice calm but cutting. "In fact, I never really did." Charles slams his hand on the table. "What's going on? Where's Peak Pulse's CEO? We were promised a meeting with the decision-maker." He glares at me, his face reddening with anger. I smile, savoring their confusion. "You're meeting him," I reply. "I'm the CEO of Peak Pulse Consulting. I've been since I founded it 10 years ago." Silence engulfs the room, heavy like a storm about to break. Nathan's mouth opens, then closes, like a fish out of water. Colin drops his pen, eyes wide. Margaret clutches her glass, her fake composure crumbling. Charles recovers first, his face purple. "Nonsense. You're an assistant, a paper pusher." He roars, but his voice lacks its former authority. I lean forward, my tone still even. "No, Uncle Charles, that was just a cover. Quite effective, wasn't it? Since none of you ever looked deeper." Sophie steps in right on cue, placing a stack of documents before me. She stands behind my chair, her gaze confident. "These documents," I continue, sliding the contracts toward them, "outline the terms Peak Pulse will consider for the merger between Bennett Enterprises and Brightcore Industries." Nathan jumps up, his voice trembling. "You're joking, right? This is a scam, isn't it? Some stupid prank." He looks around, seeking agreement, but finds only silence. I tap my phone, projecting Peak Pulse's financials onto the large screen. Peak Pulse currently manages over $15 billion in client assets, with a 95% success rate in business restructuring. We decide all major changes to Brightcore's structure. Does that look like a prank? I turn to Daniel Foster, who's sitting straighter, his eyes brightening. "Mr. Foster, can you explain why Brightcore chose Peak Pulse over Bennett Enterprises' initial takeover offer?" Foster clears his throat. "Peak Pulse's reputation is unmatched. When Bennett Enterprises tried to acquire us, Peak Pulse's restructuring plan saved the company. Profits are up 47% since we adopted their strategy." He looks at me, nodding gratefully. Charles nearly shouts, You deliberately sabotaged the family. Harper Tech, Coastal Shipping, Brightcore, it was all you. I smile, counting on my fingers. And many others, Uncle. For 10 years I've quietly blocked every greedy takeover your company planned. I lean closer, my voice cold as steel. You taught me I'd never be good enough. That was your mistake, not mine. Margaret whispers, her voice shaking. Impossible. You're just a nobody. But her eyes have shifted, filled with fear. Nathan slumps into his chair, face pale. Colin flips through the documents, hands trembling. Charles stares at me, his gaze a mix of fury and helplessness. I stand, adjusting my suit. You have until 5 p.m. today to review the merger terms. If you refuse, Peak Pulse will start buying Bennett Enterprises stock on the open market tomorrow morning. As I walk out, the wooden door closes behind me, leaving the Bennetts in chaos. Victory surges through me, not out of revenge, but because I've proven my worth. Just as my mother, Eleanor, always said, success is the value you create, not the recognition others give. The media response hits like a storm. Hours after the meeting, articles in Forbes and the Wall Street Journal hail me as a hidden genius, building a consulting empire. From nothing right under the Bennett's noses, a Business Insider piece dubs me the giant slayer, detailing how Peak Pulse saved companies like Brightcore Industries, Harper Tech, and Coastal Shipping from the Bennett's greedy grasp. A reporter tries digging into my past for dirt, but finds only my quiet years working in Brooklyn. My secrecy, once a weapon, is now legendary. The Bennetts have no choice. After the meeting, they hold an emergency session at the Hamptons mansion, but this time, I'm not the one in the corner. I sit across from Charles, presenting merger terms. Peak Pulse will control Brightcore's strategy, and Bennett Enterprises must shift away from predatory takeovers. Charles, still red with anger, tries to negotiate, but his eyes betray defeat, no longer commanding, but powerless. Margaret, usually sharp, is silent, clutching her wine glass. Nathan mutters about lawsuits, but Colin, the only one who read the documents closely, shakes his head. We can't win, Nathan, he says, voice low. They accept the terms, not out of agreement, but because they know Peak Pulse could buy their stock any moment. A week later, Charles announces his retirement. In his resignation letter to the board, he writes, Lucas showed me a different way to do business, not through exploitation, but through real value. I read it, mildly surprised. Not because he's changed, I know he's saving face, but because I realize I've fulfilled what my mother always wanted, reshaping how the Bennetts see business. I begin restructuring Bennett Enterprises, integrating Peak Pulse's sustainable strategies. Struggling companies now get support to recover, not takeovers. I'm not doing this to reconcile with the family. Trust broke long ago, but to prove business can create value without ruthlessness. Soon after, I'm invited to receive the Entrepreneur of the Year award at a major Manhattan event. That night, I stand on stage, spotlights on my familiar navy suit. Below, my mother sits in the front row, her eyes shining with pride. Sophie Carter, loyal from the start, stands beside her, clapping enthusiastically. The Peak Pulse team, Anna, David, and others, is there, their smiles proof of the years we fought together. In my speech, I say success isn't about power or fame. It's about creating value, even when no one sees. I look at my mother, recalling her words in that old notebook, knowing I've lived up to my promise. A small side story emerges in the weeks that follow, when I meet a young Peak Pulse employee, Mia. She comes to my office, voice trembling. Mr. Lucas, I just want to say, your story inspired me. I used to think I wasn't good enough, but you showed me hard work, and doing right leads to success. I smile, feeling simple joy. Peak Pulse isn't just saving companies, it's inspiring people like Mia, who were doubted like me. Leaving the Manhattan event, my mother takes my hand in the lobby. Lucas, I always knew you'd do it, she says, eyes misty. I hug her, the weight of 10 years melting away. Thanks, Mom, for believing in me, I whisper. Sophie, nearby, hands me a coffee, from the chain I secretly own, and winks. Boss, tomorrow's packed. Ready? I laugh, gazing at the city lights sparkling by the Hudson. I walk to a corner of my office, where the chipped wooden desk from the Brooklyn office sits as a keepsake. I run my hand over its rough surface, recalling sleepless nights saving Carver Industries, hiding smiles behind wine glasses, as Margaret mocked me at the Hamptons. And the moment I stood in the meeting room, declaring myself Peak Pulse's CEO, leaving the Bennetts reeling. This desk is a reminder, everything I've achieved came not from their approval, but from persistence and faith in my path. Today, I host a family meeting in the same conference room where I stunned them. No longer the lavish Hamptons mansion with chandeliers and fine wine, but Peak Pulse's headquarters, where I hold the reins. The modern room, with its long wooden table, glass walls overlooking Manhattan, and large wall screen, exudes the power I've built. As I enter, the Bennetts are there, but the vibe is different. Charles is absent, retired, leaving a letter admitting I changed his view of business. Margaret sits stiffly, her usual silk dress looking out of place in the sleek setting. Nathan, once smug with his legal deals, keeps his head down, eyes averted. Colin, the only realist, flips through documents with reluctant acceptance. I sit at the head of the table, no longer in the corner. Thank you all for coming, I begin. My voice calm but commanding. Today we discuss Bennett Enterprises' future post-merger with Peak Pulse. Margaret tries to interrupt, her voice shaky. Lucas, you don't need to show off like this. I smile, leaning forward. Show off. No, Aunt. I'm just doing my job, as I have for 10 years, while you thought I was an assistant. Nathan mutters something, but doesn't dare speak up. Colin nods, taking notes, as if finally acknowledging I'm in charge. The meeting lasts 2 hours, unlike past ones where I was the butt of jokes. I outline plans to restructure Bennett Enterprises, adopting Peak Pulse's sustainable strategies supporting struggling companies, investing in innovation, and abandoning predatory takeovers. I'm not doing this to mend ties. Trust with the family broke long ago, but to honor my promise to my mother that I'd build a different kind of business, one that creates real value. As the meeting ends, Margaret leaves without a word. Nathan silently follows. Colin pauses, looking at me. You did well, Lucas, he says, voice low. It's the first time a Bennett has acknowledged me, and though it doesn't erase the past, I feel a slight relief. Sophie walks in after they leave, carrying a coffee from the chain I secretly own. They looked like they got hit by a truck, she says, winking. Boss, you've crushed it. I laugh, taking the coffee. Not yet, Sophie. This is just the start. She nods, handing me a new stack of documents. Right. A London consulting firm just sent a partnership offer. They want Peak Pulse to expand to Europe. But word is a big competitor's eyeing the same market. I flip through the papers, excitement rising. A new challenge, a new arena. I've changed how the Bennetts do business. Now I'll take Peak Pulse global. I reflect on my journey, from Brooklyn's office to Manhattan's lights. Each step taught me patience amid mockery, resilience saving Carver Industries, strategy foiling family takeovers, and confidence standing up in that meeting. But what I'm proudest of isn't the Entrepreneur of the Year award, or Forbes articles. It's the small moments, like Mia, the young Peak Pulse employee, thanking me for inspiring her, or my mother hugging me after the Manhattan Gala, saying she always believed in me. A side story crosses my mind, as I decide to start a fund for small businesses, inspired by Brightcore and the companies I've saved. The fund will help struggling firms access capital and advice, ensuring they never become prey for giants like the old Bennett Enterprises. I name it the Carver Fund, honoring my first client who trusted me. When I share the idea with Sophie, she nods. That's how Peak Pulse leaves a legacy, she says. Not just money, but change. I turn back to the glass, gazing at the city lights. 10 years ago, I was a young guy mocked by my family. Now I stand here, not just Peak Pulse's CEO, but someone who reshaped an empire's business. Yet my journey isn't over. A rival in Europe awaits, and I'm ready to face it. I think of my mother's words in that old notebook. Success is the value you create. I've done that, and I'll keep going, not to prove to the Bennetts, but to prove to myself. I sip my coffee, smile, and whisper, success isn't what you brag about, it's what you build when no one's watching. The story of Lucas Bennett in I Built a Multi-Million Company in Secret mirrors the values and challenges of life in the U.S. today, especially in the cutthroat world of business and societal pressure for success. Lucas, belittled by the Hamptons Bennett family for his administrative assistant job, secretly built Peak Pulse Consulting from a tiny Brooklyn office to a sleek Wall Street headquarters, saving companies like Brightcore Industries and thwarting the family's greedy takeovers. His journey, from the humiliation of family gathering taunts to revealing himself as CEO, showcases patience, strategy, and faith in ethical values. These details reflect modern U.S. culture, where entrepreneurship, resilience, and ethical business are prized. Yet family, societal, and personal expectations remain major hurdles. For example, Lucas, keeping the old Brooklyn wooden desk as a reminder of humble beginnings, aligns with the American value of honoring roots. While his Carver Fund for small businesses echoes today's U.S. trend, where entrepreneurs like Elon Musk or charitable funds aim for social impact. The lesson: stay patient and trust your worth, even when underestimated. In America's competitive society, where success is often measured by fame or wealth, Lucas's story teaches that true value lies in the impact you make. Like Lucas, you may face doubt from family or colleagues, but instead of seeking instant recognition, work hard quietly, as he did in Brooklyn. Learn from Lucas's secrecy in hiding his identity to avoid sabotage, applying it to protect your startup ideas in America's fierce market. Finally, like the Carver Fund, use success to uplift the community, because in the U.S., legacy isn't just money, it's how you change lives. Subscribe to the channel to follow journeys like Lucas Bennett's, turning humiliation into triumph. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video with more inspiring stories from New York.